So we're going to do our own introduction. I'm Ryan Wood, and my father is down below, Robert Wood. The next talk is really a father-son team. I mean, we've worked together on this for quite some time. We have a combined experience of over 70 years. My father has a PhD in physics from Cornell. He spent 43 years at McDonnell Douglas and earlier Douglas Aircraft Company working on missiles in space and research and development management. My experience has been academically just a mathematics and computer science degree, and worked at several high-tech firms, Intel, Digital Equipment, Toshiba. But in the UFO field, I've been focusing with Dr. Bob Wood on UFO documents. And last year I produced the first UFO Crash Retrieval Conference in Las Vegas in November. We're going to have a second one coming up. And I'm the president of the Majestic Documents website, where the vast majority of all Majestic documents that I know of are on that site, along with a massive amount of other detail. So, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Bob Wood.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Good afternoon, everybody. Carl Sagan once said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Where is the evidence?" And the answer is that the evidence is so obvious from all the different sources that we heard about this morning from Dr. Sala that you don't even need the question documents to prove that. So the way to think of it is that if there had been crash recoveries and we had taken advantage of the technology perhaps and worked on that problem, you would expect to find some documents. There should be documents. So when documents show up, you ask yourself, well, are they fake or are they genuine? The chances are 50-50 that they might be genuine or fake. And what we're going to do with that thought in mind, we're going to go through the 8 topics here, where I'll talk about the first 4 topics, and Ryan will talk about the last 4, and we'll have some joint conclusions. The Majestic document sources. On the first slide, it shows here that, and this is chronological, you can see from the top where Jaime Chandray received in 1984 these 2 documents that were the Eisenhower briefing document. And then going on down, there were more drops, and Don Berliner got the Special Operations Manual, which was filmed. Then later on, Tim Cooper, who entered the field by receiving documents in 1994, started getting them all the way up to 2001. So, but the key thing to note is we have 103 separate documents, 3,700 pages, and of those pages, about 800 are classified at various levels. The different classification levels were on the right. The sources, though, that go along with the previous table that I showed you with the dates, these are all chronological now, so that's the earliest to the latest. The Eisenhower briefing document was the first one to come in 1984. Down to the last one in 1999, a document talking about Eisenhower talking about Project Jehovah. And what we'll do is we'll spend some time a little bit on the Bowen manuscript, on Eisenhower Oppenheimer, and on Special Operations Manual. So the 10 different drops that Tim Cooper received had involved 6 pieces of mail, actually, and 4 given to him personally. This is one of the pieces of mail that's never been seen before in a public forum, which was, this is an enlargement of the meter area. This is a meter stamp, and you read that number, that turned out that was assigned to a small office in the CIA. So that was the source, even though it was torn off. This was the Don Berliner received Special Operations Manual film in 1994, and that meter was issued to Quinlan's Drugs. And Ryan and I went there and investigated whether that might have been the source. And, we'll go on to the next. Now, so Timothy Cooper was the recipient of quite a few of these documents. And so naturally, he immediately was the target of the skeptics claiming that he had somehow faked them. But it turned out he started making relevant FOI requests in late '88 largely associated with the JFK assassination. And we believe that it was disgruntled or disillusioned document declassifiers who, in part, chose to leak the documents to him because he had received a reputation. He requested FOIA documents from 12 different agencies. He received a reputation of being a troublemaker. His father, however, was in the USAF UFO program, and we have a citation signed by General LeMay, which you can see in the workshop, that shows that that's the case. And so his father was the one who has interested in this, and was one of his own sources. So now let's go to the second subject, which is the Special Operations Manual itself. This manual was, as I say, received in the form of undeveloped film, and when you developed it, it turned out that it looked like this on the left: Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology, Recovery and Disposal. It was restricted, top secret. The War Office logo was used, but it turned out that we found one that used as late as '69. The footnote in print identifies Mj-12 as the customer, and the technical order numbers up here are consistent with what you'd expect. It's a special operations manual, and there's a warning notice on the back of each page. It was originally simulated by me in January 1995, which I'd been retired for about a year. I decided this is the opportunity to follow up on my long-time interest in this topic. And so I'm going to tell you right now what the purpose of the manual is, for those of you who haven't read it, or if you want to read it, you can find it in our table later. But the purpose is to recover the ET remains. It talks about the shapes of the craft. It says security is of great importance. The creating and uncreating instruction detail is significant. And it describes reasons for good reporting. And the next chart goes through the sequence of the scope of the manual. I'm going to speed through these pretty quickly because they're very straightforward. It says the reason for it is to give the people who are involved in clearing away the wreckage and the bodies a better understanding of what they're trying to do, so they can more expertly deal with it, increase their efficiency. And they emphasize the importance of taking it seriously, and again they emphasize the national security aspects. And the reason for the security are stated at that time as very straightforward. And remember, this was a time after the Cold War was running pretty hot. Bad impact on the public and for general knowledge, but particularly the danger of advanced technology falls into the hands of unfriendly foreign powers, and we'll come back to that later. Now, it mentions the 6 goals: to recover the ET materials, the entities, special teams to do it, run secure facilities in secret locations and all over the world. I think that's significant because we see, and Ryan will mention later, some recoveries associated with Project Moondust. The current situation, being 1954, says they don't seem to pose a direct threat, but several dead entities are recovered. No alien attempt to recover the dead or escape, and the greatest threat is from unfriendly powers. So that's the theme. And here are the shapes that were shown. The figures of the photographer are shown, and actually we attempted to go back and identify the guy by the way he cut his fingernails, but it didn't work. So anyway, the next slide talks about the 4 different types, and these shapes are from documented sightings from examination of records from various years, 1947 to 53 inclusive. So you're talking about several crash recoveries. Okay, then everybody wants to know what they look like. So here's a definition of EVE Type 1, and they always say that a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I hired Bill McDonald to go ahead, and he's a forensic artist, and he made this picture of EVE Type 1, which he followed absolutely faithfully, with the exception of the fact that he said he had 3 other sources that said that there were small genitalia, so he added those. But otherwise, it's just exactly what the Special Operations Manual says. EVE Type 2 was described here, and the picture of EVE Type 2 is one of your little grays. So I said, well, what? As long as you're down on the operating table, the autopsy table, let's see what they might have looked like in uniform. So he did that for me, and here they are, kind of a cave-like situation, which Bill Sauter would appreciate, in uniform, uniforms, and they were supposed to be detained by whatever means necessary. They were given no privileges, and loss of EVE life was acceptable. OPNAC, we don't know what that means yet, but they were clearly in charge. Okay. If there were non-living organisms, they tried to preserve them as well as possible, put them in jars, refrigerate them, that sort of thing. And clearly, there was a deception policy. Meteors, down satellites, weather balloons, military aircraft are all acceptable alternatives. And here, you'll notice that down satellites and toxic spills are just two of the things. And later on, we'll talk about raised Z that authenticates this document. And that's what we're going to talk about right now, is the authentication process of documents. And here there are three techniques. First, you establish provenance, and that's the best. If you don't have provenance, however, you'd like to have the original. And with the original, you can do lots of interesting things. You can date the ink, or match the type font and press, and then there's some intellectual things. I'll give you examples in red of each of those. The first one is where the provenance is wonderful. Here's the Vernon Bowen manuscript. Now, Vernon Bowen was a fellow who went to the public library in New York every day that he could, and got everything about UFOs that he could find, flying saucers they were called in. And here is the page of one of his chapters that he sent to the Air Force in 1961. And they stamped it top secret magic and returned it to Timothy Cooper in 1999. So what you can do is match the type font, and in particular, this I took to an expert in the government printing office, and he took a look at the original Special Operations Manual and said, oh, that looks like monotype honor. And he brought out the 1956, I think, style manual and showed that that was the case. And here, Ryan spent a lot of work finding the raised Z. Now, it turns out that one of the things about these hot lead presses was that an unused letter sometimes got a lot of crud underneath the press slug. And so it got raised from time to time. And that was an earmark of a 1954 hot lead press. And Ryan found in the 1954 camera guide a raised Z, so that's a perfect classical zinger, we call it, to show that this was a 1954 document. You can also look for anachronisms. People argue that Area 51 wasn't there in 54, and why would people be impressed by down satellites when the first satellite didn't go up until 57? And the answer to those questions are found in this journal article, January 5th, 1951, and this came along with a handwritten note from somebody who was there, living in Las Vegas, when they had this special program that showed in the next article that there was a $300 million construction job going on somewhere nearby, and that's $300,000 in 1951. Pretty significant amount of money. The down satellite argument is there were four other choices: meteors, weather balloons, military aircraft, and toxic spills. And of course, if you're trying to be deceptive, you don't have to make a true statement. And why would anybody be impressed? Well, the answer was that in 54, before 54, we had all these references talking about satellites, and some of them talked about would they ever crash, what would you do if they crashed? So therefore, people would have been sensitive to that kind of question. Another example of is the etymology associated with the use of words. In the Special Operations Manual, first aid is initial caps, but now, of course, it's first aid lowercase. Screwdriver was two different words, but when we started using it to describe vodka and orange juice, it became one word. Craft tape was capitalized then. Some of you may remember craft tape, but now it's like Kleenex, it's lowercase. So here's a classic thing to do: is you compare two manuals one at a time, and that's a good example of that. And you compare with genuine documents, and you do this comparison on all these different things, and they all check, every single one, and you compare it with the style manual, they also check. So this is a 1954 document. Anyway, this led me to as I listened to all of the skeptics tell me the reasons why this was a fake document and the other documents were fake, I started to make a list of all the phony claims of fakery that I'd heard. And here's the list. The first, the government says they're fake. Well, the second is there's no provenance for them. Well, of course, if somebody is illegally leaking a document, they don't want to be identified. Archives can't locate them. Well, if the archives have them in a classified folder, they're not available for the public. Anything can be fake today. Well, that's true, perhaps more today than it was in 1994 when this document came in the mail, or 1984 when the original Eisenhower briefing document came. Content is a theme of science fiction. Well, everything real is science fiction first. Such secrets would have leaked out. They're leaking today. Typos and misspellings prove they're fake. Well, actually, you can prove the opposite also, but the fact is that many of these are rough draft documents, so you don't expect them to be flawless. One anachronism destroys authenticity. This is one that I have to be very careful about, because if you are trying to provide a deceptive document, in other words, if you are a disinformation specialist, you would include some false information along with good. The War Department logo was discontinued, and actually we found one in '69. And then why would the government keep ET Life secret? Well, the answer is coming up, right here, as a matter of fact. There are two sets of reasons. This first set of reasons is the set that you'd have in 1941 when the first crash occurred, Ryan will talk about later, at Cape Girardeau, and say 1947 during the Retrieval event. There, the concern was protecting science and technology from our enemies. And of course, to conceal our ignorance, we didn't know where they were from, why they were here, or what they were going to do to us, or protect our airspace. And there were some cases where we did unconstitutional things. We wanted aggressively to develop the technical applications, and Ryan will talk more about those later. And here's an unknown. We don't really know what the religious impact might be. Now today, 2004, to those you kind of add some additional thrust. You want to avoid criminal prosecution of those who did illegal things. And actually, the people who are in charge of this program know that there is some illegal stuff going on. And so there might be some genuine negative reactions, including financial or political. For example, we found one document that had been crossed out, redacted, over the financial impact. The third thing, and this is, I think, very important. If the public were to really appreciate how sophisticated the government has been in keeping this under wraps, they might wonder what else has been kept under wraps. Is it possible that TWA Flight 800 was not exactly all that's been described? Or were there anything behind what we know about the 9/11 event? That sort of thing. We might have a stable standoff with ETs. We might be getting a lot of high technology from them, and we need it to retain control over the bad guys. And there are bad guys in this country. We're fighting them right now as we speak. Religious backfire might be substantial, and it's quite unknown. I get a lot of different opinions as to whether, in fact, I was just talking to somebody 2 days ago, a very interesting idea, pointing out that, for example, the proof that the face on Mars was extraterrestrial would impact the fanatics of the world more than the non-fanatics. Interesting question. And there might still be a clear and present danger. So, let's see why continued secrecy is a bad idea. I think it's been illegal, unethical acts to ensure silence. I think they're outside our democratic processes, more so after the Patriot Act has passed, and we pay for them with our taxes. Courts may not have had an opportunity to review what's going on. And if you want to find the secret to unlimited energy, perhaps, or how to get to the stars propulsion-wise, you'd think that you'd find it quicker if you had more people working on it than just a few cloistered people who haven't had the top secret clearances. And there's no panic. We're already adjusted to ETs. It's not a secret anyway to those who've been abducted, seen UFOs, or are on the program. So, so the question is, when do we all start to laugh at the Emperor's new clothes? And now we're ready for Ryan to tell us about the evidence from the archives. Oh, yeah.
We're on time and we're ahead of schedule. I wanted to start my talk with evidence from the archives and lead people a little bit into the National Archives and then progressively ratchet up the evidence that comes out of the National Archives until I end with something very damning. But the first slide talks about the National Archives that I've been to, the ones here at College Park and Library Manuscript Division and the various presidential libraries. Next slide. And most of it is circumstantial, as you'd expect. You don't see any smoking guns, you don't see any missing Mj-12 documents in the National Archives, your best hope is that a declassifier slips up, screws up, and leaves a document in the system that you happen to perceive or find, or you find something low level that they don't understand the context of the field was strong enough or well enough, and you do. And so you can basically outthink the declassifiers and gain circumstantial understanding that's damning. And an example like that is the next slide, where you look at the White House phone records from the Truman Presidential Library. I have the phone records, who called who at the switchboard for the whole year, and you plot them by day, and over the whole course of the year, you suddenly see this giant bubble in the middle 2 weeks of July 47, where everybody's working Saturdays. And I wonder why that is. Again, it's circumstantial evidence, but it's kind of interesting. And the other thing that you get when you look at the phone records, or at least I did, next slide, this is an example of what the records look like, but it includes all the calls to the White House and switchboards and multiple phones. It is a list, a complete list of all the players, or the potential players, that were involved in the Roswell incident. And the first one is AG, Attorney General, and on down the list. This is sort of an exhaustive, credible list of all the people that were making a lot of phone calls in the White House in July of 1947. And one of the surprising ones was Captain Buchanan, the third one down there. And well, that name rings a bell. Where did I see that? Oh, yeah, that's in one of the Cooper leaked Majestic documents. He was on the mission, the White Hot Mission Report team. And so here you have a correlation that it's the right time, right place for somebody that was involved in the Mj-12 documents that we leaked. But again, this is all sort of circumstantial. And I'd like to pull the FBI files on all these people. I have some of the National Personnel Records files. You can find their children. It's about 1 or 2 man years worth of work to do a thorough investigation of every single soul there and their related offspring to try to find evidence about their involvement or non-involvement or knowledge of the Roswell events in 47. But anyway, that's the sort of in-depth, grunt work that has to be done, or will be done over the next few years to fully vet the Roswell incident in an incredible way. Because it's about more witnesses right now, not necessarily about more documents. I'm not sure we'll get more documents. The next slide. Here's an interesting sort of comment. We have Senator Carl A. Hatch of New Mexico, who meets with President Truman on July 9th, 1947. I wonder why he did that. Just fun, or to discuss the UFO crashes. Again, circumstantial evidence, but suggestive and interesting. And then there were no other senator meetings within months of on Truman's daily calendar, which you can get a copy of at the National Archives. Now, one interesting memo that I found at the National Archives is this Lieutenant Colonel Blount to Dr. Evans, Dr. Robley Evans at MIT. Psychological analysis of reports of UAOs, unidentified aerial objects. They change the name all the time. Unidentified aerial objects. The Special Operations Manual a few years later is called UFOBs, unidentified aerial objects, OB. And then started with flying saucers. Uncorrelated targets is probably a good one today for what UFOs are. They can't track them. So that's part of your challenge when you're requesting things out of the government is you ask for UFOs and they say, we don't have any UFOs. Well, you can ask for the right thing. You have to ask for a complete list of uncorrelated targets. And then they'll say it's not available or something to that effect. But it's interesting, this letter refers to a new top secret report that's being published by Blount, and with the comment, one of these so-called flying saucers crashed in Mexico. However, the details are somewhat bizarre at this moment. Bizarre, I read in my mind as alien bodies or something out of the box that we can't handle. But here's something in the public domain, there's no question about it. It's in the National Archives, talking about top secret reports, psychological aspects of UFOs, and a crash. Here's the actual document. It's in Record Group 341, which for those people that have ever been to the National Office of the Air Force, entry 44, box 27. And that's sort of the way it goes. It's library speak. Next. Here's another more damning and interesting document. Again, this is a Moondust document released by the Defense Intelligence Agency, public document. There's no debate or anything. It describes a crash of an unidentified object in the Bolivian territory of May of '78. 4 meters in diameter. We found the guys that worked on Moondust and who had visited this particular crash and shipped it back. We interviewed them. Their impression, although they took photographs of it and they weren't experts at it, was it was completely no vents or ports or hatches or anything like that. Fairly lightweight, all metallic. They touched it, they took pictures of it. It looked extraterrestrial to them in May of 1978, and they shipped it back to Wright. So, again, a wonderful report. Witnesses have corroborated. So it's very strong on my list of, well, it could be a crash retrieval. We just don't have the evidence. Next slide. Now, another interesting case is the Somalia explosion. In January 1996, the president of Somalia calls up the CIA and says, you know, something happened here in my backyard. I want some help. And so they go out and look at it. But it's not clear that they don't admit in the document they found anything. But the citizens are reporting physical and mental health problems, both animals and people. Symptoms include dementia, skin rashes, boils of the skin, aching stomachs, and skin shedding. If it was just simple radiation, I think that they might say that. It was just radiation, we don't know where it came from, an asteroid or something like that. But I think they were just reporting the facts very credibly and interesting, and that you have a truly anomalous event there. And it's worth checking today. I mean, I'd love to go back. You know, it's only 8 years, and try to find some of the witnesses and remember, you know, how bad was your dementia? Did it continue? Well, again, I answered the question. The skin rashes, things like that. But that's a very clear potential crash retrieval that's in the public domain. Nobody's doing any investigation on that I'm aware of. Next slide. And now here's another document from the National Archives. It's an original document. It's the famous, or Stan Friedman made famous Cutler Twining Memo. Shows an NSC, National Security Council Mj-12 Special Studies Project. Top secret restricted. Up in the corner, lots of debate about this top secret restricted, but there's many examples of top secret restricted information. And it has links. This special studies project is used in other documents to link Edith Bronk and Berkner that are on the Mj-12 committee, allegedly, for the Eisenhower briefing document, to the Special Studies Project and Mj-12. So there's some corroboration that goes back and forth. Next slide. So the evidence is really out there. It just takes time and money and patience and lawyers. And every time I spend a week in the National Archives, I walk away with good, circumstantial information. I was there yesterday. Spent today. It took me a year and a half to have 23 boxes of Assistant Chief of Staff material declassified for intelligence, Chief of Staff for intelligence, from 44 to 56 or something like that. And most of it was on special, was training and things like that. But there's a few boxes of index cards of top secret. It's just an index of top secret control numbers for reports. And many of these little index cards were withdrawn. That means there's a little white slip in there saying, restricted access, you can't see it, you have to place a FOIA request. What I found fascinating is that they were clustered around December 1950, which is another crash retrieval time frame mentioned in the Eisenhower briefing document, the Indio Guerrero crash in Mexico. So the evidence is there, and they have a date, then you can get it in context, and then start requesting it. So it's out there, it just takes time and effort to get it. Next slide. The next concept to cover really is reverse engineering. I won't say too much, but I'll show you some interesting examples that are from the archives that are relevant about that. Next slide. This is one of my favorite shots of the early YB or XB-35 from 1945, similar to the Horton Brothers Flying Wing, but they were really trying at it. Next slide. The Advanced Study Group, this is one of the places where you would have sent Roswell-type crash debris at Wright-Patterson. And so here's a memo on 12 September 47 to Lieutenant General Twining, who was in charge, about the Advanced Study Group. And this is sort of a congratulatory memo. Thanks for the great tour. We had a bunch of professionals in here, and XYZ showed us about the power plant department and the materials plant. But it's interesting that when you look for the files of the Advanced Study Group in College Park in Maryland, they're missing. It's not that there's a withdrawal slip saying we've restricted this. It's like the file folder's empty. And that's just another way that the government can pull things out and restrict access, is they have the clearance, just walk in and remove it, remove the evidence. Next slide. Here's another interesting memo. January 28, 1949. So they had the Roswell-type crash, and they're working hard on trying to figure out the reverse engineering of it. And one of the things that they would work on that's most obvious is the materials, because that's sort of the easiest thing to wrap your arms around. I mean, neutronic engines and fiber optics and integrated circuits might be so far beyond the scope of the scientists in 49. Not that they wouldn't try, but it would be a big stretch. But the materials would be something to sink the teeth into. And sure enough, they're focused on magnetic materials, high heat resistant ceramics, metals and alloys with increased strength to weight ratios. 1/3 of that sentence is sort of, in my mind, normal, but magnetic materials and heat resistant ceramics seems out of the box. Again, it's circumstantial evidence for reverse engineering, but it's intriguing. It starts the bells digging and keep digging. Next. Wilbur-Smith memo. This is another interesting memo that's in the public domain. Flying saucers exist. It's classified higher than the H-bomb. Van Bush is in charge, just the way our documents discuss. And it's of tremendous significance. And it's of tremendous significance to the U.S. today. Next slide. One of the leaked documents that we have is the Flying Saucer Analytical Report. And it says flight instruments and controls are operated by optical waveguide fibers similar to glass rods, except they are flexible and have a plastic cladding wrap. This cladding wrap, this is 1947. The patent was issued in 54, and this cladding wrap is the key breakthrough to increase the signal-to-noise ratio of fiber optics that allow fiber optics to work well. I mean, the glass rod concept goes back thousands of years for transmitting light, but the cladding wrap is the sort of new twist. That was the patentable twist. Next. These other technologies are kind of interesting too. I'll just talk for a moment. The transistor, the transistor was patented or quote invented in December of 47. In my judgment, there's no way they could go from Roswell in July to December. There's too much history and so forth. But now if you go back and say that the Cape Girardeau crash happened in 1941, which we'll talk about in just a second, it had a long time to work on it. And the other thing that's interesting is that silicon and germanium were two key metals that were worked on a lot during the war. Well, not metals, but semiconductors, really. And those were the things that were used to create the first transistor. And so I find it odd that there was so much R&D effort on the fundamental materials during the war, and it happens perfectly dovetail with the transistor. It's speculative. I give it, 1 chance in 6 that it was related to ET. But I mentioned the fiber optics. I probably want 1 chance in 2. And then the integrated circuit is described in the Majestic documents in the White Hot report that's in. You can buy it outside or look at the website where it describes a series of fine integrated dots arranged in a circular pattern. And it's an early description of fiber optics in 47. I mean, not fiber optics, the integrated circuit. And night vision technology was talked about in Corso's book, and I found the early history of night vision. And it's all military, and it's all classified programs, and you can find documents back to the mid-50s about night vision in the National Archives being a military-related project. Again, it's speculation without doing more digging and research, but it's interesting. Next. So the first Roswell, Cape Girardeau, is, it may not be the first one. I think there's a lot of other crashes there before that, and I'm going to be doing a conference later this year about crash retrievals, the second annual crash retrieval conference. But it's the first one we have sort of reasonable evidence about. Go to the next slide. These are some of the sources for this Cape Girardeau event. I mean, they're mentioned in the Majestic documents, a crash in Missouri and so forth. But we have also the testimony of Charlette Mann, the deathbed confession of her grandmother to her about the first-hand event of her grandfather blessing the alien bodies in Cape Girardeau, New Mexico. We got publicly classified documents that tend to support it. We got leaked classified documents from the archives, or leaked ones. They're pre-Roswell. And that's the real thing, is it? If you throw Roswell out, just throw it away, totally. There's plenty of evidence left to say that there was other crashes. So I've used archives, several intuitives, there's some anonymous sources. Master Sergeant Harry B. Cooper, Tim Cooper's father, also said there was a Cape Girardeau crash in some handwritten notes that Tim supplied. And then I've done some on-site investigations, and I keep an activist still, given time and money. Next slide. Keep clicking again. Click through all these so that you see. Reverend Huffman, the quick story is that Reverend Huffman, a Baptist minister, Red Star Baptist Church in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, spring or fall of 1941, was called to a supposed plane crash, and when he got there weren't dead humans, there were dead aliens. He gave blessings to these aliens, and then the military sort of wrapped it all up and swept everybody back. So that's the quick story. And then you have to sort of try to verify a lot of the details about when it crashed, where it crashed, how did it crash, who was there, was the FBI involved, did the full investigation. We can talk more about that in the workshop as well. Next slide. This is Charlette Mann. Once you click through the various things here, I'm just going to talk about this for a second. There's a little video clip about this, but she got an alien picture from, we'll just hear her sort of talk. Nobody can hear it because it's coming out of the laptop, but she described what her grandmother said to her in detail about hieroglyphics inside, 3 non-humans, long fixtures, crinkly skin, which was kind of unusual, a fire around the crash. And she's a very credible witness. I've talked to her many, many times, and she's got no axe to grind, no nothing. She just wants to get the information out. And she's not profiting from it in any way. So I give her like an 8 on the witness credibility scale. Next slide, please. There's also a bunch of other documents that are leaked documents. This one in 42, FDR memo to President, to Dr. Bush to proceed. The Marshall memo that sets up the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit in 1942. It was just after the LA air raid, and sort of shook them up. And they decided, well, we better get a unified program going and do logical thinking about how to deal with these extraterrestrials. Especially because there's a mention in that document that sets it up that there was a crash in the ocean in the San Bernardino Mountains. Then there's the Einstein-Oppenheimer memo in June of 47. These are all pre-Roswell. And then Van Bush says, on July 5th, we must exploit this technology after just discovering the the details about Roswell. Next slide. So there's also a little anachronism too that we have to deal with, is that one of the witnesses, Thomas Cy Cantwell, who is one of Tim Cooper's sources. He was a guy who allegedly worked at the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, and which is now allegedly operating out of the NRO. Talked about a crash in Cape Girardeau, or in southwestern Missouri, Cape Girardeau southeastern, and one captured in 1942 in Louisiana. There's another crash. This is worth exploration, the Louisiana 1942 crash. Next slide. This is the memo that sets up the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. Issued orders to Mj-12, a special intelligence unit to be created to further investigate the phenomenon. Two other crashes, one in San Bernardino Mountains and one on off the coast. Next one, this is the actual memo itself. On the right, the Office of Chief of Staff, OCS, filing numbers. The filing numbers are in sequence and they're in order. They make sense, although one of them you can get today, which relates to the LA air raid. The other one is this document, which you can't find. Next slide. So why is it authentic? Again, the filing numbers are right. There's all sorts of unique words. Cannot be identified as conventional aircraft. Mystery airplanes of, in fact, not earthly. Just the language is very appropriate for this 1942 time. But the liability is we don't have any forensic paper to do any testing on. We have a photocopy of a carbon smudged document. Next slide. Another document is the White Hot document, which talks, even in the recovery case of 1941, did not create a unified intelligence effort to support the possible technological gains. So they were somewhat annoyed that they had this stuff in Cape Girardeau in 1941. It went to the Manhattan Project, sort of got buried, it wasn't really exploited and leveraged. And now when Roswell happened, Van Bush was sort of pissed off that, hey, you guys screwed up. We had this opportunity and we didn't do anything, and so we have to keep going. It's lovely sort of appropriate language and comment and social interplay between the documents and the people that creates an aura of authenticity besides just the overwhelming massive amount of documents that are available. Next slide. Next. The scientific probabilities, this is another section of the White Hot report. It says, based on all of evidence available collected from recovered exhibits under this alphabet soup, from Air Materiel Command to Armed Forces Special Weapons Project to Joint Research and Development Board to the Strategic Air Group to MIT. MIT was involved early on. And then there's a comparison of artifacts from the Missouri. I must admit that from the Missouri perfectly fits in the typewriter space, but it's not there in the document. Next slide. That's what the actual document looks like. Next slide. So again, why is the White Hot report authentic? And that's it's one of our best documents. It's very interesting. There's all sorts of arcane language, neutronic and planform and artificial intelligence at the time, aerodyne, and then all sorts of subtleties of NE 102. I said, well, what's NE 102? And it turns out it's a neoprene scintillation material that's appropriate language. For 1947, it makes no sense today. So to fake this sort of stuff, you have to be, have 3 or 4 PhDs or be part of an intelligence agency to achieve it, and then have a lot of patience over the next 20 years to do it all. So unlikely, highly unlikely. Next slide. So why believe? We've got a good deathbed confession of Flo Huffman to his granddaughter. We have multiple second-hand witnesses. The brother of the sheriff of Cape Girardeau said, yeah, I remember something like that. It was so damn weird and bizarre, I didn't believe it. That's sort of basically verbatim unquote. I give that like a level 3 on the credibility of 1 to 10 for witnesses, or a level 2. But it's confirmatory in a subtle way. So then we have all sorts of documents related. So in the general outranking of crash retrieval cases, Cape Girardeau is down the list. Roswell or maybe Reddish Forest is at the top of the list. or Kecksburg is next, and then Roswell, and then maybe Cape Girardeau. There's a bunch of other ones, but there's a lot of evidence. So the next slide. And now we go to the key conclusions, and Bob will give his first.
Right. Next one. We have two charts of conclusions. First is that if you assimilate all of the literature that you've read over the years, my conclusion is there's been a number of alien species been involved for a long, long time. And that we have really been effective in keeping the crash recoveries secret using deception. That the secrets can and are kept very well, and the leakage of secrets is expected, and there's a management process to make sure they don't get out of hand, and that no real problems occur. I used to think that it was good guys and bad guys, that it was very clear who was good, those who were withholding this from the public were bad. But it's not that clear anymore. People generally, in my opinion, are just doing the jobs. The question of how does our society let it happen that way? The next conclusion I have is that some of the smartest men of our generations have managed this program. It's very clear that Einstein was involved, and maybe he was in charge of the reverse engineering at one time. Budgets easily buried in the black. I think some of our technology clearly can be tracked to UFOs, but I don't know what percent. But I think the government does have the right to conduct constitutional tests at an area that they own. So there's nothing wrong with the testing that they're doing at Area 51 as long as it's constitutional. But I'm not sure it's constitutional. And the last thing I think kind of captures where I think I'd like to go. I'd like to see us get new energy sources to help the the world, and to figure out how to get the postal systems to go to the stars. I think that would be good for Homo sapiens, and I would encourage us to work towards that goal. So that's what I think. That's my summary conclusion. Ryan's got a sort of a separate set, and also a reference.
Thanks. UFOs are a national security threat. Dolan's book is all about that. And it's very, very real, and that is the sensitivity of a lot of the government. There are all sorts of credible cracks in the government and the secrecy, and I keep poking at them in the National Archives. I can keep finding witnesses. I can keep getting little toeholds into the evidence. Disclosure of the technology is naturally a concern, but the religious impact and the public reaction is the big wild card. We're not going to trust our government more after they tell us the truth. I can guarantee that. It's definitely going to be less. And the whole religious thing is just such a wild card, particularly with Bush in the White House. But anyway, next slide. Here's some core reasons why it's an honest national security threat. They've reprogrammed ICBMs and rendered them inoperable. This is based on witness testimony and Freedom of Information Act release documents. So there's no debate that that's really happened. Is it a plane, a missile, or a UFO? This is probably what caught the Soviets and us cooperating in the early on. You know, we couldn't tell the difference between a UFO and an ICBM, and so we started talking about unknowns and trying to clarify how to distinguish all three of them. Disabled military aircraft and killed pilots, the Materiel incident being one of the ones. There's other incidents around the world where either the pilot was stupid or following orders and got himself killed by chasing the UFO too close, maybe inadvertently or deliberately. They abduct citizens for unknown reasons, somewhere between the thousands and the millions rate, and I'm sure that they don't have a permission to do that. And we may have we've been unable to negotiate or trust anything that EVAs say, maybe on a governmental level or certainly on the individual abductee level. The reports are continuous that they never honor their commitments, they don't tell the truth, it's obscure. Next slide. I also want to put in a shameless plug for the second annual UFO crash retrieval in Las Vegas, actually Henderson, Nevada, where we're going to have an overview of all the UFO crashes from time immemorial. We're going to try to do a complete, exhaustive paper and outrank them based on credibility details. And focus on that. But we've got a guy who's going to talk about being inside the Russian Area 51. We have new crashes in August of 45 and 54 at California military base. I'm going to do a talk on murder in Mj-12. Probably going to have a talk on the societal implications of disclosure and discuss that. And then more documents in Mj-12. I want to try to pack it like it was last year with basically a whole day of 6 or so crash retrievals from great speakers, and then sort of majestic documents and so forth. Next slide. And so what's in the workshop is the last thing. Next slide. So in the workshop, Bob and Ryan will do our best to answer all your questions, and it'll be much more interactive and detailed. We'll show you some original content like Bob showed before, leaked documents. You get to see some originals. Yeah, there's an original. Don't fall off there. And more evidence from the archives. We'll talk about the burned memo in more detail and go into it. I think there's one more slide too. And then there's a lot of details about Tim Cooper and the analysis we've done on his writing style and forensic linguistics. Another interesting thing is the testimony of Dale Bailey. Dale Bailey was a person that shredded the Special Operations Manual in a vault on orders from his admiral, and he's testified to that fact. So that's sort of a rough encapsulation of things. Are there any more slides?
We might say that we also have copies of what we showed today available at our desk.